What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the brewery. I've got my windscreen on today, so hopefully the audio is a little bit less harsh. But let me know as we get the channel rolling here what you like or don't like technically, if that makes sense. So I'm trying to make sure things are consistent and high quality for you. So audio or video or lighting or whatever you notice that you would recommend, I appreciate any comments on those things. So what we're doing today is I've run into an issue for the second time in my kegerator in particular, and I want to flip you around and show you what that is and talk about my ideas to solve it. So I'll turn you around and we'll get right into it. Okay, so what we're looking at here is the components of my gas setup, everything except the tank. So what we have here, just kind of strewn about, my CO2 regulator. That's a primary regulator with a single gauge, or actually two gauges. One is for the tank level and one is for the outgoing pressure. That runs into my new 4-product regulator, and what the 4-product regulator allows me to do is have 4 different vessels, or not even vessels, but just 4 different operating pressures at the same time. So basically, the idea here is my tank has however many PSI, very high, because that's direct from the tank. I'm turning it down to whatever my max pressure is going to be on any one of these 4. So at the moment, or I should say as of yesterday, I had root beer on, and that was my highest carbonated beverage. That was served at about 25 PSI. So what I did is I turned up my primary regulator to 25, and then that fed my root beer, which was 25, but then I wanted my IPA at more like 12, so I had 12, 25. This was a bottling line I had also at 25, and then I had my mango more like 10 PSI. So kind of like we talked about on our last video of carbonating and line lengths and things like that, this allows me to do that with different pressures on different kegs at the same time. Anyway, the reason I have this all pulled out is that I came out this morning and my gas was basically empty, and I just got that tank filled about 2 weeks ago. There's no way it should have been empty, and especially when you're looking at things overnight and it goes flat overnight when you're not even using it for carbonating or bottling or anything special like that, you know that there's some sort of a leak. So what I wanted to discuss today are a couple different ideas for finding your leak and fixing it. And then I also wanted to discuss a new system that I'm looking to move to in the near future and eliminate the need for all these different connections and hose clamps and things like that. So we're getting some nice, good, solid dog barks for you today. And that's no charge. You can just enjoy those in the background while I try and talk. So anyway, I'll set the camera up and kind of talk through some options. So with my current setup, I'm just using some leftover line that was given to me to use as gas line. This is a 5/16 ID, but it's a very large OD. It's a 9/16 OD, and it's a little bit bulky. So I should mention the main reason I'm using that is that it was extra stuff that I had around, and I didn't want to buy new stuff at the time, and so that's what we're going with. So the system I'm using is to, as I mentioned, feed my 4-product regulator from the tank directly, and the reason I'm mentioning that again is I'm looking to move to a system where I don't need this additional secondary regulator in the keezer for space reasons. I'm looking at running a line directly from my tank to my secondaries, and I need to confirm that that can be done, but I'm pretty sure it can. So I'm going to look into that. Aside from that, and what that will solve is, this is a pretty bad leak point here with this connection. It's hard to find the O-ring to fit this specific tap right regulator, and so with that setup, I'll have a dedicated line that'll have a new O-ring or easier to obtain O-rings and solve that leak. So what we're going to do is kind of just move down the line here and look at all of our possible leaks and what I'm planning to do to solve those. This next spot here, we have a barb fitting threaded into our regulator. So that's a possible leak, but I do see sealant on that, so I feel pretty good about it. I've got some gas-rated Teflon tape that we could reseal that with, and we could reseal both gauges. But for now, I don't think it's going to be an issue, because when my leak started was when I incorporated this regulator. So this has stayed the same, and I'm hoping that's a good way to diagnose and say that this is probably okay. It's got a nice Oetiker clamp on it, so I feel good about that. Moving on, this is where I think we're going to start encountering issues. I feel good about the factory sealant or tape or whatever on their connections between each of the regulators and on the inlet and all of the outlets. I'm feeling pretty good about that. Hopefully that's a safe assumption. What I'm most nervous about are where I slid the hose on to each of these barbs and then put a different sized worm-style hose clamp on each connection. And I don't feel great about that. So what we're going to try to do, oh, and I also have the same thing on the other end at each of my disconnects. So what we're going to try and do as kind of a budget-friendly option, just to test, before I go and buy all sorts of Duo-Tight fittings. And what those are, for those that don't know, Duo-Tight is sort of like a shark bite fitting. Shark bite is a home plumbing solution where it's a quick sort of a disconnect style where there's no clamps or no fasteners or anything like that. You just have a quick, it's hard to explain. You can look it up. Look up Duo-Tight or shark bite. That's what I'm looking to go to. And they make a variety of fittings to fit even threaded, so I could switch everything threaded to Duo-Tight. I can go with a smaller diameter line that's more flexible, fits in smaller spaces, things like that. And so that's something I want to do in the future, but for now, as I mentioned, as a quick trial solution, what we're going to go with are these injection-style hose clamps. And I've had good luck with these in the automotive realm as far as having a much better holding power and sealing much better and being more reliable. You can crank down tighter on them. They seal more completely around the hose, and they stay tight better because the way they do this is you clamp down, and as you get tighter, it squeezes down on itself and holds itself tight. Where here, if this were to strip out on a worm style, that's all you've got is that one holding point where this, and then you've got your excess sticking out here. This excess goes to the inside of the clamp and pushes down harder and harder as you tighten it down. So it's kind of like a self-locking style of a clamp. So anyway, what we're going to do is just swap everything out for this. I'm going to get a refill on CO2, which is basically my only expense. These are maybe 20 or 30 cents a piece, and I've got 10 of them, so big deal there. Our CO2 fill is about $15, and so worst case scenario, I lose my gas again. That's a $15 expense to try it, versus I can see somewhere between $80 and $100 or more in Duo-Tight fittings everywhere. So at some point, I'd like to upgrade, but for now, we're going to give this a try. So first thing is going to be to slide the hose off, because these style, it's best to slide over the hose rather than undoing it completely, putting it around the hose and then tightening it down. So we're going to undo our hose, and then I'm actually going to heat the hose and make sure I can get it slid on all the way onto the barb. You can see on this one, actually on all of these, they're not slid all the way down, and I'm not crazy about that either. I'd like a full seal, so I'm just going to try and get one here to show you, and then I'll go through and work on all the others. We may end up having to cut this, but hopefully not. like to get it off without hurting anybody. There it goes. Okay, so now we're going to heat that up. In my case, I've used hot water before. I'm just going to be real careful with a lighter today. Get my hose warmed up. Make sure you put your clamp on first before you put the hose back on. Just going to get this a little bit squishy. And try and slide it all the way. There we go, all the way up to the end. That's great. One thing I will mention is these clamps are meant for, I think they're meant for a 9/16, but because I'm sliding it over that larger end of the barb, it's going to be a little bit of a stretch for this clamp to fit. So wish me luck. I hope we can do it. Another tip is that it's always preferred with a hose clamp, if you have the option to use a hex, like a socket or a wrench, that would be the best case scenario. You can't really get a good feel of how tight it is just using the flat screwdriver option. So I always prefer a wrench whenever possible. And we'll simply tighten that down. Okay, I'm going to work my way through and I'll see you back here once we're done. Here's kind of what I came up with. Went ahead and slid all the way up to the stop, as you can see. If that would focus, that would be so cool. There we go. And then slid the clamp up, not quite as high as I could. I like this one. I wish I could have gotten a little higher on these, and I still could. But we've got new clamps everywhere on the regulator, and then 3 new clamps on the disconnects. I'm also going to switch over one of these for a torpedo. I've got one additional torpedo. I don't think I have 2. I wish I did, but someday. And one thing that's important to remember with the torpedo disconnects is you have to... Ooh, what do we have here? Okay, we've got an in, and okay, that's an out. You have to add a small washer. I'll show you what that looks like. You have to add this small washer. Reason being is your other disconnects have that built in. The torpedo, because they're stainless, do not. So make sure you add that or it'll leak out in no time. So we're going to get everything hooked up. I'll go get my gas refill and check in with you tomorrow for me, but just a second for you, and we'll see how we did overnight. And here we are. It's actually been quite a bit longer than I first anticipated. It's been about 5 days with the new clamps and hoses and connections and everything. And one thing to note is that this pressure gauge is not necessarily an accurate idea of the level of remaining CO2. So we're sitting right now at about, you can see there the 500 mark, just above 500 psi or 40 bar. And that's where we've been for the last 4 days. So one thing I wanted to add to not get confused is that when you go and pick up your gas bottle, you might be sitting at, I don't know, 60 or 70 bar. Somewhere around there is where I was at on a full tank. But if you stick it in your keezer and chill it down, that pressure is going to drop quite a bit. Just with about any gas, when you chill it down, the pressure is less. So anyway, seems to have worked. So we're going to stick with this setup for now. And I'm very pleased that we don't have to go duo-tight just yet. So thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you on next week's video. Make sure to like and subscribe as always, and we'll see you then.